Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Crypto World Behind the Scene podcast. I'm very happy to have with us today Jaguar-Adva, chairwoman of Bitcoin Tracker Bridge Fund. Hi, Jaguar. You have a fantastic name. Welcome, and we're happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Ariel. It's such a pleasure being interviewed in such a brilliant podcast series. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Great. So tell us a little bit about yourself, dive into to that, and then we will go ahead to the topics we want to cover today.
Well, thank you for asking. Besides chairing the crypto tracker, I would say even more specifically, Bitcoin Tracker Bridge Fund. I call it, by the way, a bridge fund specifically because it should bridge the old world of banking to the new world of crypto. So that's one thing. And then I'm CEO of Jaguar CPAs doing crypto taxation, and CEO of Jaguar Lawyers doing crypto law mainly and cyber law. So that's all I do.
It sounds like a lot. So let's dive in right to the first topic. Can you share your thoughts about investment funds? How do you see it these days?
That's an excellent question because I have an answer to. But actually, I would say that investment funds are many and of many types and elements defining them. There are funds that are investing in real estate or in shares, stocks, in debt, in commodities, in so many investments, or I would say base assets. So there should be, and there are very few, so as of now, crypto-related funds, investment funds. We call it crypto funds, but these funds are divided to several types of funds. The largest, the main, the big ones that are not yet existing, by the way, nowadays, or not fully existing, are trust funds. Trust funds are huge. Usually they're pretty huge in size of investments and funds managed. They are very heavy regulated by the SEC, the local regulators. And thanks to that much of a heavy regulation and a lot of security that is being given to the investors, they are open to the public, meaning they go for the retail markets, for the small investors. You can buy them or buy units in them and invest in them via your bank representative even. Crypto funds, being trust funds, are rare or up to non-existing yet. And that's the type of the fund that I'm kind of like quarreling against the Israeli security regulator in order to make my fund as such. It is not yet achieved, so I should be humble on that. There are, however, on the other edge of the line, there are hedge funds. Hedge funds are very, very slightly regulated, and therefore do not support or offer that much of let's say defense and confidence and security to their investors, and therefore they are only open to very minimal, few dozens of investors or to accredited investors, which by the view of the regulators do not require that much of defending by the regulators. And there are several funds in between those. There are ETFs and ETNs, etc. And the world is changing these days in the funds market and era, and it's changing to include and be more inclusive of crypto assets, digital assets in general, and among which would be, of course, Bitcoin, because it's the first and major crypto asset. Not just that, by the way. There are several funds in the States already. There are ones being approved in Canada. There are very few approved in Europe. There isn't yet one, at least not a major one, in Israel. In Israel, there's only very few, I'd say less than a handful of hedge funds only, which are not thereby open to the public. And that should change, in my opinion. So these are funds in general. Mine is meant to be, or I'm trying to make it a trust fund. However, I've been pushed by the regulators to have it only as a hedge fund. And these exist already. I will not be the first or not even the second of making such a fund. So these are funds.
Sounds very interesting. So let's one of the hot topics currently is the NFT. There are many issues dealing with NFT, and there is a big hype, especially in the US, in the NBA, etc. But let's talk about, the more gray area or gray, dealing with the NFT. What do you do with taxation? How do you deal with it?
Okay, so first I be able to connect the first subject we talked about, the crypto funds, to the NFT world. And just to mention in just 2 sentences that being a digital asset as well, some funds, and my next fund would do that as well. Some funds are aiming NFT investments. So it could be connected as well to the first subject. In general, NFTs are non-fungible tokens. I would bet that most of your listeners and viewers would already know what that is. These are tokens that cannot be changed or interchanged within others. There isn't any one other token that is identical to that other token. It is totally unique. And that is why, that brings me to the second subject, that is why taxation of NFTs should and could enable it to be in somewhat different and maybe easier than just crypto assets. I would start with an example of how crypto assets are being taxed, and then I'll compare it to NFTs. In general, crypto assets are a digital asset mainly. Usually it is configured as such, it's considered as such. And therefore, if you're not trading with them as a business, but just as a person or a company that's doing other things, but just that's not its business or your business, then you would have gains, profits, which would be considered capital gains, and therefore being taxed by capital gains tax brackets, and plus some additional taxes, but in general, just capital gains tax. However, NFTs could be considered as something else, which is not like shares, not like regular digital financial assets or anything like that, but maybe because NFT is actually a product and an element that gives you a verification of an existence of something. It could be an art piece, it could be music, it could even be rights for software, rights even in real estate. It could be a verification of any target matter to be verified. And then if we need to tax the so-called capital gains over trading of NFTs, we need to see how you got that NFT. If you just bought it and sold it, then it's capital gains. But in many of the NFTs, people just mint them. It's somewhat equivalent to mining of crypto assets, but minting your NFTs actually could be considered, it could be defined as creating a verification of an existing element, of an existing asset. So it could be more relevant and more, I'd say, similar to actually creating a derivative over an existing asset. It's not just creating of the asset itself, meaning production of it. It could be just making another derivative of it, meaning having another section of it, having an additional element to an existing asset. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's take oranges. Say you have either produced your oranges, maybe you have an orchard, or you bought an orange, and you've paid for that already. If and when you sell it, you'll be taxed with capital gains taxation, that's fine. But what if you've created an NFT that verifies the origin of that orange, or verifies the type of that orange, for example, or verifies whatever processes that orange has been going through. That could be considered an additional, derivative asset that relates to the basic asset, the orange itself. And therefore, we need to actually reconsider what was your taxation of the orange. Are you an orange factory? Is that maybe a business taxation or maybe a capital gains tax to begin with? So being or could be being defined as a derivative actually complicates the kind of taxation regarding NFTs, as long as it is looked at as indeed a derivative and not just the basic asset itself. And minting is considered, or could be considered, will be considered by the tax authorities in many ways similar to mining. And mining has been considered as a business activity. Many people who have mined naively in the 2011, in 2011, in 2013, they were mining Bitcoin, for example, and they had no idea that what they were actually doing is a business activity. Nonetheless, they would even assume or realize that they'll have to make tax reports regarding that. I have so many clients that I need to take care of these days who've done this in 2011 and 2012 or 2013, having no idea that they have had to report back then. And what do we do now? Making like a retroactive report, reopening existing reports that they might have had. It is much more complicated. So if mining is a business activity, then minting most naturally would be considered very similar to that, and just as well a business activity. And that has many more implications.
And the government is building a plan to do sort of a retroactive taxation of these activities, or just looking ahead of the front for the future?
It wouldn't be wise to say whether the government is planning or not, because first and foremost, regulators are always slower than technology. Or if I put it more positively, technology is much, much faster than any regulator on earth. So that's first. Second, NFT, just to mention, has been around the world for several years. It's been very fashionable only in the last 1 or 2 years, and it's been more fashionable because it has started to acquire financial valuations and aspects to it. But the technology exists ever since, I would say, 2014 at least, if not before. So, so the regulators have not given any notice to that up until recently because it meant nothing financially. But recently they are. So that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question was, should it be related differently? And I think that it's going to change. It's going to change a lot of thinking. By the way, not just that, NFT world, and it's been spread around, is and will be changing the whole legal world of copyrights and copyleft, because it is actually derivative rights, or maybe creating more and more rights and other overrights and underrights to an existing asset, as I've mentioned. So if we're creating many more rights, or we're dividing them and dispersing them, there should be a lot more activity to be taxed that way.
Right, sounds like there is a lot still to find out and finalize in this term. And in terms of banking with crypto, where do we stand right now? Is it a no-go? Is it starting to go? Where are we standing right now?
Okay, the answer to your question depends on which country you're being taxed at. Because per different regimes of different countries, banking is either just hard or very, very hard. Hard can be doable, can be manageable, but very hard is just costly to manage, and sometimes it's not bankable. I'll give you the Israeli example compared to the US or Swiss examples. In the US, several of the banks, some of the banks are crypto friendly. And what that means is that they'll be willing to accept crypto originated fiat coming from regulated exchanges in the States or in any other place in the world, provided you go through the whole due diligence of showing where you got your funds from, how you sold them, if you can recognize the people you sold them to, then or the organizations, you need to show that. If you used an exchange, show which exchange, and showing the whole currency trail and crypto trail. So that's one thing. And you can even get a Visa card or MasterCards, maybe. I'm sure about Visa, I'm not sure about MasterCard, to use your funds, even being held as crypto still. So that's one thing, but not all the banks can do that. In Europe, several of the banks are crypto friendly as well, but they're more, I would say, they're less strict and they're more liberal on that. In general, European regulation is a bit more liberal regarding crypto than the US one. I have some suspicions why it is so, but this relates to a different podcast about conspiracy theories, etc., and anarchy. So European regulations would be easier, and therefore European banking, crypto banking would be easier. In Israel, however, first, it is a special country in the sense that only in Israel we have Section 2, so Article 2 to the banking law that actually obliges and forces banks to provide service to citizens unless some of the deviations to that, some of the exclusions to that actually apply. And the banks have to show and prove that those exclusions apply before they can refuse servicing people. So that's one thing, which is on the good side. On the bad side, banks in Israel in general, as a policy, would not receive crypto originated fiat. In general, as is. There are exclusions to that as well. Some of the banks either would not notice when you are putting crypto related originated fiat from exchanges, or even when they notice, some will be willing to receive those funds, but most of them only based on an expert opinion, such an opinion which I supply as a service. By the way, I'm not allowed to call myself an expert because I'm being a lawyer still. Lawyers cannot call themselves experts. However, that's the way it's called. It's called an expert opinion. It's what the banks call it. And that expert opinion needs to review the whole trail of the currency, like the ones in the States, and the whole trail of the crypto. Plus to supply an analysis of risk, all kinds of risks, and what would be the elements that are mitigating risks and what would be the ones that might be enabling that risk and what would be the ones increasing that risk. So one needs to buy an expert opinion, which is very costly because with that opinion, actually the service provider, like myself, I do this as part of Jaguar-Adva, not as a lawyer, but or an accountant necessarily, but as a banking and regulation consultant. We need to take upon ourselves, with the service providers, the responsibility to a case in which the banks might be fined with hundreds of millions of dollars by the FATF regulations. So that's a very risky process to offer the clients, and therefore it's expensive. It takes very many hours in order to avoid mistakes. And that's pretty unfair, I would say, to clients that actually have to justify the trail and have an expert opinion upon their own funds.
But this leaves actually only the institutional or the big players in the game, especially in Israel currently.
Even the institutionals are afraid to get into crypto investments because being public companies and traded, the SEC, the Israeli SEC would not approve them such activities because supposedly they would be so-called risking the public funds invested in them. So that's even harder. What they're looking for, the institutionals, is actually trust funds that are going to be heavily regulated, as we've mentioned in the beginning of our podcast.
So you talked about exchanges, sorry, and where do we stand in the matter of regulation and compliance? What step are we in, just to conclude the interesting conversation?
Exchanges actually offer a platform for people, organizations who want to sell crypto and to have a meet with people or organizations who want to buy and sell. That's it. As long as such a free-spirited exchange might be saying that, hey, I'm not to be fault for anyone else's crypto or fiat, whether it is money laundering or not money laundering, I'm just a tool here, I'm just a platform, that will not work. All exchanges have to be regulated. Many of them don't bother because they would say, hey, you guys don't know where our offices are, or even more nowadays, we have DEXs, which are decentralized exchanges, which are actually a technical platform. Many of the times you don't even see a company, a corporate being established anywhere. It's just several programmers doing an activity, offering a platform, a software together, and offering and enabling trades between people, or actually it's addresses, because you don't know who is the person behind any address. So on one hand, they have to comply with the regulation, very heavy lifting regulations for exchanges. However, most of them don't. If one person wants to ever be able to bank, that relates to our previous subject that we talked about, wants to ever be able to bank the fiat they gotten from any exchange, they better choose an exchange that is as heavily regulated as could be. And I would advise each and every one of us, do not bother regarding how expensive the commissions of a regulated exchange might be, because it is totally insignificant how much higher the commissions are compared to the ability to bank it. If you ever want to bank it, of course, if you want to stay on a crypto world forever and inherit that to your children, fine. But if you ever want to go back home, back to the banks, do not choose a non-regulated exchanges. I'll just give you an example. Nowadays, this is being recorded on October 2021. Nowadays, Binance is working very hard to get regulated and to improve their regulatory compliance. However, it is not considered regulated enough by most of, I would even care to say all countries' regulators. So at least in Israel, if you ever want to bank crypto originated fiat that was exchanged to fiat in any part of its trail, in Binance, for example, forget it. It's going to be impossible, maybe until I would represent a client suing that kind of a bank and maybe trying to clear and to whiten, in many sense, the fiat that was derived from Binance, but that has not been done so far. We're here October 2021. On the other hand, there is, for example, Kraken, which is the most heavily regulated, at least for Israeli users, citizens, and investors. And there are the Israeli ones, B2C and Bits of Gold. Bits of Gold is not a platform exchange. It's kind of a large trader, I would call, and B2C is a full exchange. They are about to be regulated, not yet. We're waiting for the change or the enactment of getting into validity of the new law, which is supervises financial services suppliers. Hopefully, it will become valid on coming November, and probably most of the financial service providers here in Israel regarding crypto would try to get regulated by that within the next months or so. So it is not yet, they're not yet the Israeli ones, but they're about to be, and they're actually taking upon themselves self-regulations. So this would be my advice. And I could say that in the States, the SEC is actually looking for Binance and the likes of in order to enforce regulations and compliance upon them. I supply compliance services, being a chief compliance officer as a service for several exchanges and companies that would like that. Some just don't bother. And it's part of the services that I offer. And it is so important to get it. You know, companies don't have to necessarily get it from me, but please, guys, do get regulated. I would advise that warmly.
Excellent. Excellent tip, and thank you very much, Jaguar, for the conversation. Thank you very much for the time, and hope to see what's coming up next in the crypto world, and what will change in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for hosting me. It was a mere pleasure, and I look forward to your conference coming soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.